Life is full of challenges. How to live, how to love, how to clean your microwave using just vinegar, lemon, and a sock. But where there are problems, there are great minds in search of a solution. Join us to observe the history of human ingenuity through the prism of the past, the Google glasses of the present, and the robot laser eyes of the future. This episode, Other People. Hell is other people, said 20th century French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, and he'd never even seen Take Me Out. Like a diligent maths prodigy whose parents have forced her onto the one show, humans keep multiplying furiously. Soon, we are told, the Earth's resources will dwindle, and the time is coming when humankind's very abundance may cause our own annihilation. But until the glorious day dawns when the people are eliminated and cockroach cyborgs ascend to their rightful place as rulers of a barren, scorched planet, how the hell are we supposed to put up with each other? Join us as we investigate. From the BBC Problematorium, it's Big Problems with Helen Keen!
You. And here to help me unravel the eternal mystery that is other people. He is himself an enigma, wrapped in a riddle, wrapped in a lark, wrapped in a song thrush, wrapped in a seagull. That was a very demanding recipe idea from Ocado. Please welcome the voice of doom!
Hello! It has been said that human beings are born alone, live alone, and die alone. Which makes you wonder why anyone bothers with Tesco dine for 2 for a £5 meal deals.
But in fact, we seem to be wired to build social groups. With every advance in technology, the way humans connect and interact has changed and rearranged.
From the telephone to the internet to the electronic mind meld, how will the other people of the present reform to create the communities of the future?
Yes, I'm an only child, and I think that's one of the reasons why I've always found it tricky working out how you're supposed to behave around other people. Obviously, it's not fair to blame your mum and dad for this sort of thing, but does any parent ever really think, I'll just have the one because they're bound to be really, really well adjusted? Humans need to connect. We've evolved to become part of a community. We're social animals.
That's as opposed to antisocial animals. For example, a dog with a drum kit. There's evidence that social isolation leaves most humans highly stressed.
But what if social interaction leaves you highly stressed too? I'm quite an anxious person anyway. I worry a lot. People say it's a waste of time worrying, there's no point. And I think about my life and all the time I've spent worrying, and then I look at how things have turned out and I think, why didn't I worry more?
We expect the world to understand, to get us. But when we try to examine this scientifically, even though we may be souls whose intentions are good, we are constantly being misunderstood.
There's a phenomenon known as the transparency illusion, the idea that our feelings and intentions are clear as crystal to other people. But sadly, it appears that everyone else is just too busy to devote the time and attention to us to work out how our slightly confused face differs from our hungry face. We even believe we can understand and be understood by animals. We believe our pets know us and we know them. And we can judge them and their motivations and feelings accordingly. A devoted dog owner might say,
I could totally tell from his guilty little hairy face that he knew he'd done a naughty thing when he ate Mummy's shoe.
But when this has been studied and tested under controlled conditions, it turns out, well, that dogs will try to appease us if they sense we're upset without having the foggiest idea why, and owners haven't a clue about the real reasons for their dog's behaviour.
She thinks I care about her weirdly delicious shoe, the simple fool. Oh, as I believe Socrates intimated, for a being to truly flourish, it is not simply a matter of material things, but also virtue. And oh, will I ever escape that damned question that haunts my every moment. Am I a good boy?
We don't fare much better with other people. If we go through life hoping that other people will come to know us and understand us, are we hoping for too much?
Life can seem like an endless game of charades in which you've been given a short history of tractors in Ukrainian, and your team just keeps shouting out, Bambi, Gone with the Wind.
And if it's hard to read people face to face, it can be much, much harder to read them when you're literally just reading them in an email or text. How can we make our feelings clear when we only have the written word? Maybe this accounts for the popularity of emoticons and emojis, the little characters or pictures that you can add to an electronic message to make it clear when you're being friendly.
Smiley face.
Or serious.
Sad face.
Or when you're with a tiny chicken.
Picture of a tiny chicken.
Now, you might say, people have been using the written word to communicate emotion for centuries, haven't they? Did Hardy feel the need to clarify Tess's feelings towards Angel Clare using a tiny thumbs up? Did Joyce struggle to convey the vitality and irreverence of Molly Bloom without the help of a winky face with the tongue sticking out?
But national use of emojis is quite telling.
In the UK, we use the winking smiley at twice the average global rate.
Yeah.
The French are widely stereotyped as the most romantic people on earth, so no surprise, hearts are the most popular in France, closely followed by an image of a bidet full of garlic.
Americans use burger and drumstick emoji twice as often as the global average. Nothing to add there. And the least used category of emojis worldwide? It's the picture of reading materials, the newspaper, the pile of books. Do we really not discuss our reading anymore? Maybe we all feel like 17th century French philosopher and moralist Jean de la Bruyère, who said,
"We come too late to say anything which has not been said already. Sad face."
When I was growing up and I imagined my future life, I assumed that at some point everything would come together and I'd be like Carrie from Sex and the City. The reality turned out to be far more like Carrie from the film Carrie. My mother used to say, the first step to making a friend is breaking the ice, and the key to breaking the ice is paying a compliment. So say something like, "I wish I had lovely hair like yours," only not in a manner that implies you're going to hide in their house with scissors and cut it off while they're asleep.
I wish I had lovely hair like yours.
It's normal to want to connect, to be part of a group, to be popular. But all groups have their rules, and that's something I struggled with as a teenager, and still, if I'm honest, struggle with a bit today. Society rarely offers us explicit rules for behaviour these days, but it wasn't always that way.
When first American President George Washington was a child, he recorded a collection of rules of civility and decent behaviour in company and conversation.
These included, number 1,
Every action done in company ought to be with some sign of respect to those that are present.
number 2,
When in company, put not your hands to any part of the body not usually discovered.
and number 3,
Show nothing to your friend that may affright him.
which brings us to option 1 for coping with other people.
Find out the rules.
I think there are a number of social situations that would benefit from some clarification.
Personal space. How close is too close?
Ideally, I'd like everyone to stay about 2 metres from me unless they've been thoroughly de-germed. But there are always some people who have no sense of personal space, who seem to think it's socially acceptable to edge gradually closer and closer while you're talking to them until they're practically sitting on your lap with their weird hot breath rasping on your forehead.
Sorry, I didn't think you'd mind. I'll move.
However rebellious and free-thinking we might think we are, we're products of the society we've grown up in, and society's unspoken rules can be the most difficult to break.
In the teeming mass of humanity, it can be hard to march to the beat of a different drummer. It's also hard to march to the beat of an indifferent drummer who's trying to text his girlfriend while he's playing the bongos.
In the 1970s, social psychologist Stanley Milgram became interested in the patterns of behaviour that people follow when they travelled on the New York Metro. So he suggested to students in his research seminars that, as a project, they should just go up to someone on a tube train and say to them, "Excuse me, but can I have your seat?"
They had to ask courteously, but offering no justification. So they couldn't pretend they were ill or dizzy. They just had to ask.
At first, none of his students wanted to do this. It's not like they were being asked to do something physically threatening, but there's still an unspoken rule that you need a reason to ask for someone's seat. And most of them just knew instinctively that they wouldn't be able to break it. Finally, one student said he would perform the test. He agreed to ask 20 people for their seats and see what happened.
Within a week, a rumour started circulating at the Graduate Centre.
They're getting up.
Even when no reason was given, about half the people asked for their seat would get up. But what was a bigger deal for Milgram was that the student had only managed to try the question on 14 people instead of the 20 planned. When Milgram asked him why, he said,
I just couldn't go on. It was one of the most difficult things I ever did in my life.
it's possible that he was showing Milgram something incredibly powerful about social behaviour. But it was also possible that maybe his life up until that point just hadn't been all that difficult. Milgram decided that he had to try this for himself. This is what he said about his attempt.
I was about to utter the magical phrase, but the words seemed lodged in my trachea and would simply not emerge.
When he finally managed to ask for a seat, the anxiety had made him feel so ill that he genuinely needed it. What Milgram's experiment demonstrated was that there's a huge amount of anxiety that prevents us breaching social norms. This is why some people would rather die in a burning building than run out of it naked.
The self-help industry is predicated on the idea that the world has a set of secret rules, and if you can just find them out and follow them, you will win at life.
I like this idea because I rarely win anything other than Spider Solitaire. When I worked as a temp, I loved the self-help books for the business based on military strategies. Books like Office Management and the Art of War that help you apply ancient tactical skills to, say, reorganising the stationery cupboard.
Ancient Chinese strategist Sun Tzu says, "The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. Also, to hide all her post-it notes."
People try very hard to make admin jobs sound exciting. So they'll talk about firefighting if they've got a lot to do, or headhunting if they're recruiting, or tearing out and devouring the still-beating heart of your slaughtered enemies. Actually, maybe that's why they didn't ask me back to Office Angels.
Everyday social interaction has undergone seismic shifts since the world went online. Now, anyone with a computer or smartphone has the opportunity to contact people from all over the world, to interact with them instantaneously, and also to tweet them repeatedly, saying they hope they die soon and unpleasantly.
The idea that freedom of speech or expression allows you to say whatever you want is a bit of a myth. There are plenty of situations where the law doesn't let you do that. The classic example being shouting fire in a crowded theatre, potentially causing a dangerous stampede.
See also Helen Keen's sixth form disco, immediately after the bit with the pig's blood.
It's an irony that in the early days of home computing, making insults appear on screen was used to make computers appear more friendly and accessible. In the 1980s, Utah computer specialist Dale McKinnon was worried his clients were intimidated by these new machines. To make them more comfortable, he wrote a program he called Insults that generated elaborate abuse. So, bizarrely, at a time when the popular sci-fi view of technology was dominated by the Terminator or Blade Runner's replicants, McKinnon's computer screens were calling his clients,
"You inhuman shovelful of raunchy pimple squeezings."
Before the show, we asked our audience to generate their own insults to see if they can hurl abuse as well as a 1980s computer, and whether we can spot the difference between humankind or computer unkind. Let the games begin!
You pathetic excuse for an extrovert custard enthusiast.
So do you think that's human, computer? Yeah. Human, no fooling you, yes, but no name was given, so we can't credit you, whoever that's.
You scaggy bucket of infested parrot droppings.
Computer, yes it was, well done.
You good-for-nothing shovel full of stale coyote snot.
You were spot on, yes, it is a computer.
You heap of unmentionable rear-end deposit.
No, I'm afraid that was Anne Pollard. Hello, Anne. Thank you for that.
You useless apprentice of Alan Sugar.
Human, yes, thank you, Simon Wood.
1111 1110 1100 0000 1111 1111.
Actually, Ken Spears.
Option 2 for coping with other people. Force them to abide by your rules.
Early internet service providers didn't know they were creating an anonymous stalker's paradise. Their big worry was that people would go online and just swear all over the place.
In the mid-90s, AOL set up filters that would block any rude words that users entered. Unfortunately, these would also block words that contained a rude word within them. So, shiitake mushrooms, arsenic, that sort of thing.
Because of this filter, entire communities were prevented from registering with AOL. They were blocked because when they were asked to provide their address details, they typed in the fact that they lived in, say, Penistone.
This is what became known as the Scunthorpe problem.
More recently, overzealous autocorrection seems to have taken off. There are apps for protective parents or just the easily shocked that will go through the text of a book or web page, replacing bad words with milder alternatives, so you're not disturbed by your bedtime reading.
So, for instance, in the States, where an ass is not considered to be a donkey, the word will be replaced with the not-so-rude but.
Welcome to this audiobook, Margaret Atwood's The Blind Butt Button.
Perhaps in an even more sinister vein, the American Family Association, a group promoting fundamentalist Christian values, has a website that offers versions of news stories that it tweaks to better fit the worldview of its supporters. The site does this with an autocorrect feature that, amongst other things, insists on replacing the word gay with the word homosexual. So, when it reposted an article about the sporting success of American sprinter Tyson Gay, readers were greeted with the wonderful headline,
Homosexual eases into 100-meter final at Olympic trial.
as computers become more sophisticated, there's an impetus to use them to enforce real-life rules by bringing them into policing. Obviously, the ultimate aim for any computerised police force will be RoboCop.
In a future dystopia, perhaps a desperate, corrupt government will put a human/robot crime-fighting machine onto the streets. And then, 27 years later, they'll do the same thing again, but with a new version that's not quite as good.
We're still a long way from that. But programs linked to CCTV cameras have been tested that can pick up on suspicious behaviours, loitering or walking unusually slowly. And there's a camera system in development by Cardiff University that analyses crowd movements, identifying patterns in the way people move and groups come together, the aim being to trigger an alert when fists are about to fly. They're essentially being used to predict crimes before they happen. This is the sort of technology that newspaper columnists trumpet as
Just like in Tom Cruise film Minority Report.
Minority Report is a movie set in a future where people are arrested before they commit planned offences. I don't know if you've actually seen it, but it's not a film about the sophisticated programming of CCTV cameras. It's a film where crimes are spotted by humans with psychic powers who are all connected electronically and lying in a giant vat of conducting fluid.
All right, Saj, how's it going?
Well, we've got 3 of our officers wired up and lying naked in a bath together. And they've just had a vision about someone over in Aberystwyth who's going to do some fly tipping.
Many online communities aren't policed by external enforcers insisting they follow the rules. Instead, the community works together to resolve disputes, talking everything through. This may sound like some hippie-ish dream, but when you consider the power that social norms can have just on a tube journey, it doesn't seem like such a weak way of enforcing reasonable behaviour. This is all about putting trust in the community itself. Wikipedia founder Jimmy Wales has likened it to a steak restaurant where customers need sharp knives to cut their meat.
They could also use them as weapons to stab each other, but restaurants usually trust their customers to behave appropriately. They don't make each of them eat in an individual cell to prevent knife fights, though I think there are some branches of Little Chef where they do that.
But whether you're updating the Wikipedia entry on Elizabethan poetry, starting a riot in Cardiff, or just repeatedly refreshing your inbox to see if someone's emailed you, ultimately what we're all seeking is connection. Connecting to information, connecting to other human beings, connecting your foot to the window of Poundland. This desire to connect isn't new, leading us to
Option 3 for coping with other people. Learn from the past.
long before the days of getting frustrated because your Wi-Fi connection was playing up. People were annoyed by whatever other glitchy means of communication were available to them. Even ancient medievally kingdoms need ways to get messages to and fro.
My lord, it's a raven carrying a message for you.
A message. Dark wings, dark words. Let me see. Oh. It is a portrait of a cat that has been dressed as Daenerys Targaryen.
But technology that connects people seems to inspire a fear of the wrong sort of connection. With the internet, we worry about lack of privacy. We worry that we may be letting bad people into our homes through the medium of our computer screens. But these aren't new fears. In the early days of the telephone, a time when handsets were distributed with careful instructions like,
Speak directly into the mouthpiece, keeping moustache out of the opening.
the worries about and the hopes for this magical new means of communication were remarkably similar to those we hear about the internet. In 1880, the Scientific American was certain the telephone was a force for good.
Every individual, however secluded, will have at call every other individual in the community.
There were also worries about etiquette.
Is it ever appropriate to answer the telephone in a state of undress?
And a big fear was that the ease of communication by phone calls would mean that soon everyone would know everyone else's business. A journalist in a London newspaper in 1897 said,
"We shall soon be nothing but transparent heaps of jelly to each other."
So you see, we've been here before. It's hard to predict the ultimate consequences of recent advances. Even quite mundane technology can have far-reaching social consequences.
In the same way that the flapping of a butterfly's wing can set off a chain of events leading to a hurricane, the humming of an air conditioning unit led to social changes in the US that many believe delivered Ronald Reagan his presidency in the 80s.
When the first affordable air conditioning units went on the market, people in the US began to move to southern states, places like Florida. Suddenly, people were able to live there who might have previously wilted in the heat. These people tended to be older, and they tended to be Republican voters. Over a period of time, there was a huge shift of these people from northern states downwards that meant the northern electoral colleges lost votes, and the southern gained them. By the time of the 1980 presidential election, there were blocks of conservative voters in southern states that wouldn't have existed without air conditioning, courted by the Republican candidate Ronald Reagan.
My fellow Americans, does anyone else think it's hot in here?
And their votes swung the election his way. But if an air conditioning unit can change American politics, who knows what fresh surprises may spin off from today's technology? Professor Stephen Hawking and tech entrepreneur Elon Musk have both talked about their fears that the development of artificial intelligence, or AI, ultimately will lead to terrifying, murdery robots and the destruction of the entire human race. The late, great Whitney Houston sang, "I believe the children are our future."
Hawking and Musk believe that killer robots are our future. After humankind has been destroyed in a machine-led Armageddon, only time will tell which of them is correct.
People who actually work in artificial intelligence tend to be far less worried about this sort of thing. Demis Hassabis, the founder of British AI company DeepMind, has said,
I don't work on preventing AI from turning evil for the same reason that I don't work on combating overpopulation on the planet Mars.
As Wikipedia's Jimmy Wales has pointed out, we thought genuine AI would be 20 to 30 years away for about the last 60 years, though he's also said, when the killer robots come, you'll have me to thank for their fine knowledge of Elizabethan poetry. But why mention killer robots at all? Dr. Kathleen Richardson is a robot anthropologist. Not an anthropologist who is also a robot, but an anthropologist who studies what robots mean to us. She thinks that how we feel about robots is an expression of our fears about other people and our society. Robots were created within a violent society, which is why we worry that they too might become violent.
So why do many of us fear that when they finally arrive, the robots and the AI are going to hate us and turn on us? Maybe it's because we're terrified of being isolated and alone, and also enslaved and used as a human Duracell to power the evil robot empire.
We can't escape other people. They're all around us. But there are benefits to being part of a group. During the 19th century, when the whaling industry was at its peak, being stranded in the polar ice over winter was an unlucky but not uncommon occurrence. Without proper clothing, medicine, or shelter, not all ships managed to survive. But there's evidence that those stranded in the Arctic who were part of strong, active communities fared much better than those who weren't.
A common thread among improbable survivors seems to have been that in spite of hardship, they continued to celebrate important occasions together.
In the depths of the freezing Arctic winter with no food, no fuel, and no hope of rescue, having a Christmas party could mean the difference between life and death.
I've been to a lot of work Christmas do, so I can identify with that.
Yay! Still alive?
Being part of a group can have a big positive impact then, but it also has a darker side.
Group opinions tend to be exaggerated. Members are more extreme collectively than they would be as individuals. Brilliant if you're a 19th century seaman fighting off a ravening polar bear, less so if you're 75,000 fans obsessively tweeting abuse at someone who's snogged a member of One Direction.
This leads us to option 4 for coping with other people.
Develop good groups.
Cheers! So, how do we do this? How can we be a good group?
One answer may lie in software design. When you look at the comments section after many news articles or blogs, it's not easy to imagine that we live in a benign world, peopled with kindly fellow humans.
But according to Wikipedia's Jimmy Wales,
You can either weep for the future of humanity, or you can design a better comments system where a community can emerge.
Jimmy Wales' suggestion, construct the architecture of websites to make people better. Something like Twitter can be a license to behave obnoxiously. But on the whole, people are less aggressive, show more empathy when they're made to take responsibility for what they're saying. Where the community controls its own space, the group itself will often exert pressure to be better. If you're nervous about speaking in public, it's a bit of a cliche for people to tell you to picture your audience naked. I think the point of the exercise is not to see them as embarrassingly on display, but to see them as human. To remember that the people you're dealing with are just people.
And coincidentally, our studio audience tonight has been completely naked. Still nervous.
When I was a teenager, my heroine was George Eliot, and I think she summed it up best when she said,
There are few prophets in the world, few sublimely beautiful women, few heroes. I can't afford to give all my love and reverence to such rarities. I want a great deal of those feelings for my everyday fellow men, especially for the few in the foreground of the great multitude, whose faces I know, whose hands I touch, for whom I have to make way with kindly courtesy.
Big Problems with Helen Keen was written by Helen Keen and Miriam Underhill, with thanks to Dr. Kathleen Richardson and Jimmy Wales. It was performed by Helen Keen, Peter Serafinowicz and Susy Kane. The producer was Gareth Edwards. It was a BBC Radio comedy production.